Good evening, esteemed listeners. I am Olumide Okunmakinde, and I gladly present an open address to Yoruba people of the homeland and diaspora on Oduduwa in the light of metaphorical history of nature. This presentation is in pursuit of advancing usage of the name and concept of Oduduwa beyond limitations to ancestry, isese tradition, and the naming of a sovereign country. Here's the introduction. The objective of this address is to expand the interpretative scope and horizon of Oduduwa and influence a departure from ideological limitations in respect of deific representations in Yoruba traditional worldview into the space of unrestricted intellectual discourse. This is in pursuit of the improvement of knowledge and for consolidating human understanding of the universe and space. Furthermore, to contribute to the quest for securing the foundations for the knowledge of our real world from an indigenous Yoruba philosophical perspective. It is expected that by the end of this discussion, the Yoruba of the homeland and diaspora, and particularly policymakers and the elite class who are in the position to influence positive social, political, and economic change, would come to a realization of the importance and indispensability of Yoruba indigenous culture to the well-being of the race and for the improvement of mankind. In effect, they are expected to prioritize culture for Yoruba development. Therefore, by this address, Yoruba people are hereby put on notice of factual and indispensable Yoruba cultural phenomena, which shall be demonstrated in an exposition on Oduduwa, according to S. Oduduwa. In Yoruba life, Oduduwa is the ground norm of Yoruba culture and worldview. This exposition shall be by an application of indications of metaphorical history of nature in Ifa mythology or legends. This concept, propounded by the current speaker, unveils the transposition of aesthetic material into scientific thought forms. It also sets out to complement and consolidate the gains of Western science. Oduduwa in common view and conflict of perception. This is the subheading. Generally, the Yoruba are referred to as Omo Oduduwa, that is, children of Oduduwa. Commonly, Oduduwa is presented to be the progenitor of the Yoruba race. Within the Yoruba people, conflicts have been observed to arise in respect of the name, its essence and origin. The first objection comes from religious quarters of some adherents of Islam and Christianity, as a result of misconstrued inclination towards misinterpretation and misunderstanding of Oduduwa in terms of idolatry. Further objection comes from those who claim that Oduduwa was an individual whose origin is shrouded in controversies. Another level of conflict, which is rooted in the above-listed Abrahamic religions due to the misconstrued attachment of the name to idolatry, is found in the disapproval of the name Oduduwa in respect of naming a sovereign country, Oduduwa Republic, as it is being driven by self-determination movements in the homeland and in the diaspora. Sometime in February 2021, the conflict in respect of the name Oduduwa warranted a very strong consideration of and inclination to the name Yoruba land for a sovereign country name instead of Oduduwa Republic within the office of Professor Banji Akintoye, which is the highest office in the global Yoruba self-determination course. In view of the aforestated positions, it is deemed necessary by the current speaker to make contributions to issues concerning Oduduwa and his usage within the space of Yoruba life, from the highly revered and esteemed traditional stools of Ile-Ife, Oyo, Ikiti, Beni, etc. The royal complexes are posited to directly connect with Oduduwa ancestry. In Yoruba political history within Nigeria since the era of our great ancestor, Obafemi Awolowo, the name Oduduwa as Oodua was used to designate many businesses and corporations. In view of the controversial prospects of Oduduwa in as many ways in which it is being utilized contemporarily, the current speaker in this address seeks to shed light on Oduduwa in a way through which the name can be put to a better, less conflict-prone, and far more regenerative use to the Yoruba than it is generally used in present times. In this direction, it is expected that a positive evolution and renewal of the Yoruba people's minds and culture is initiated. What is more, this presentation is also set to chart a new course of perception of Ifa and the Orisha pantheon in view of their indispensability in the course of philosophical, scientific, and technological development locally and globally. Generally, Oduduwa in contemporary Yoruba life is limited to the historical, psychological, and sociological perspectives of the religious traditions of indigenous Yoruba culture or peoples. In the historical perspective, issues of debate and discourse on Yoruba and Oduduwa are centered on migration and kingship across Yoruba land. This expands into the sociological order, Obaship, indigenous political systems and culture, sociological and anthropological discourse within the academia, and other extensions into religious dimensions of Oduduwa in symbolic anthropomorphic contexts of cults, rites, and rituals. The interplay of the above stated position also finds functionality of subjects in the psychology of religion and social order. In this address, forays will be made into the seldomly applied philosophical approach to studies in issues of religion and culture. In this dimension, data is characteristically utilized for multifarious purposes, which incline human consciousness towards cognitive resonance that forms a formidable bedrock of almost all facets of advanced human society and civilization in the course of history, inclusive of philosophical, scientific, and technological development in highly evolved human societies. The cognitive resonance mode is expected to improve human perception and understanding of the universe. It is pertinent to note that one of the aims of philosophy is the attainment of the right methods to interpret our universe. The west of the world, alongside the East, have made tremendous progress in this regard on the wings of science and philosophy. Yet there has been persistent problems of application of exclusively Western or Eastern yardsticks to interpret indigenous Yoruba cultural phenomena by Western or Eastern trained Yoruba scholars. This leads to a crisis of insufficiency in scholarship, an insufficiency arising from recurrent truncation of possible conceptual symmetries as a result of cognitive dissonance. Consequently, by this lapse, there is a general underdevelopment of society. State political players within Yoruba land, being oblivious of the enormous value of indigenous culture, particularly the Oduduwa worldview, do not see this critical dimension of Yoruba culture as an interest for preservation and cultivation by the drive of state policy. Consequently, by neglecting the most important aspect of Yoruba life, there is a recurrent and disastrous loss of cultural values in the course of time. Let us, at this juncture, now proceed with the scientifically essential essay on Oduduwa. Origin and meaning of the name Oduduwa in corpus details from Oduifa Ofumeji. According to specific corpus details of Oduifa Ofumeji, ọ̀gbaragada dífá fún odù nígbà tí ó máa dá ìwà gbogbo tí ó wà láyé ìwà gbogbo wọ́n ní kí odù rúbọ, wọ́n ní kí ó rú òpó mẹ́rin, igbá àdémú àti ẹ̀wọ̀n. Odù gbọ́, odù rúbọ, wọ́n ní kò sí ẹni tó máa yẹ ọwọ́ rẹ̀ wò. Nítorí náà, kí ó lọ rí òpó mẹ́rin náà, kí ó gbé igbá yẹn lé lórí, kí ó fi ẹ̀wọ̀n yẹn so mọ́ ọwọ́ ara rẹ̀. Odù gbọ́, ó ṣe ẹbọ náà sí ojúde ara rẹ̀ bí wọ́n ti sọ fún wípé kí ó ṣe é. Ní ọjọ́ tí odù dá gbogbo ohun tí ó wà láyé, àwọn tí à ń pè ní ìwà yìí ni à ń pè ní Oduduwa. Èyí túmọ̀ sí odù tí ó dá gbogbo ìwà, Oduduwa tàbí ìmísí Olódùmarè. Nínú igbá náà ni odù dá gbogbo ìwà sí, nínú igbá náà ni gbogbo ẹ̀dá alààyè sì wà. In English language, the above recited recited Ifa corpus would read, Ogbaragada cast divination for Odu when Odu was going to create all different beings in the world. She was advised to gather together the following items as objects of sacrifice: 4 pillars, a big calabash with perfectly fitting cover, and a chain. Odu heeded the advice and made the sacrifice. Afterwards, she was assured that no one would query her actions. Therefore, she should pitch the 4 pillars together on the ground and place the calabash on them and get her hands tied to the poles with a chain. Odu did so and thereafter created all kinds of beings and physical characters, and was, since that time, known and referred to as Oduduwa, Oodua, or the manifestation of Olodumare. It is within that calabash that everything in existence was created, and since then the calabash became the home to all living beings. Now, in this Odu, it is clearly indicated that Oduduwa is a principal deific agency of creation of the Earth's complex. For the purpose of scientific interpretative ends of this address, let us set it aside as a religious phenomenon. As in, let's set it aside, religious phenomenon, let's set it aside. And for the purpose of scientific distinction, we must take into cognizance the capacity of the main actor in the creation quest. This main actor is Odu. In its highest variant, it is a female extension of Olodumare. For extensive utility, the Odu essence comes in the following 9 terms: Oduduwa, day of creation, an essence of myth, history, and cosmology. Oduduwa, emisio. That's okay. 1 is Oduduwa, the day of creation, an essence of myth, history, and cosmology. 2, Oduduwa, emisio Olodumare, an exertive force of the supreme being, and the symbolic formation of name in deific classification in religion and anthropomorphic essence in literature and anthropology. 3, Odu, wife of Orunmila, in myth and legend on one part, wherein Orunmila, in the anthropomorphic representation of the divine wisdom by which the universe is created and administered in harmony. On another note, Odu is Odu as a fountain of knowledge, wherein Orunmila is the interpreter of knowledge of nature and natural phenomena, being the witness of fate. A pool of this knowledge is in an embodiment called Oduifa, which is represented in oral, literary, written, literary, and abstract symbolic forms. 4, Odu, mind, the mind, Odu, mind, the universal mastermind and causal energy field at the base of existence. 5, Odu, the computation matrix of nature in binary modes. 6, Odu, model foundation of physics and astronomy. 7, Odu, the central base of potential calculable universal causation. The central base of potentially calculable universal causation. 8, Odu, the cosmic matrix and proceeding point of the astrological order and order of constellations. 9, Odu, the nest of intelligence, actively symbolized by birds, of which the ego, Eyeidi, is a generative principality of illumination. In this nest, factors that determine active character are light and darkness. Symbolically, in human activities, these factors drive activities, overtures or covertures, which are based on either knowledge or ignorance. In respect of the above listed 9 terms, it is important to examine the essence of figure 9 itself as it relates to the issues discussed. Figure 9 is the finality of numbers. Any number after it is a repetition from figure 1 in the appearance of 10, which evolutionarily incarnates the essence of figure 1 in significant ways. There's a numerological concept. 1 plus 0 is still 1. So, like I said, 9 is the finality of numbers. Any number after it is repetition from figure 1. 11 is figure 2. 1 plus 1 is 2. 12 is figure 3. 1 plus 2. All the way till 18. 1 plus 8 is figure 9. Before we start again at 1 plus 9, which is also 10, repetition. It goes on like that. Now, in relation to the order of 9 Odu essences mentioned, the significant point of correlation to human existence may be found in the essence of myth and history, which, as a matter of fact, indicates the essence of Oduduwa in Yoruba, traditional history, and traditional tools. This indication is explained by necessary recourse to Jewish mystical Kabbalah, where figure 10, being the plane on the tree of life called Malkuth, expresses the earth kingdom. Primarily, Malkuth means kingdom, characterized by prominent kingship and exaltedness. This phenomenon is indicated in the legend of Oduduwa Atenworo and the exalted distinct stool of the Oni of Ife. A close attention to detail in the reference to Ifa corpus details on Oduduwa leaves much to desire scientifically. It has been the call of the current speaker over the past decade to the fact that symbols of sacrifice in Ifa corpus are potential keys to multidisciplinary understanding and directions, and also an advancement of knowledge acquisition and development. Studies limitations to rituals and objects of sociological and anthropological interest in tradition deprives not just the Yoruba, but mankind in general, of prospects of attaining improved knowledge and understanding of the universe and natural phenomena in philosophical and scientific light. When we look beyond the objects of ritual, we break into the space of interdisciplinary possibilities through the principle of indication under a philosophical approach. In the present situation, we break into the realm of physical science. In the Ifa corpus details of Ofumeji that is being analyzed, we shall take a look at the sacrificial items of scientific essence. These are Okpomeni, Igba Demo, and Emo. One after the other, we shall also look into coordinate symbolisms, particularly Ogbaragada and the hands to which the chain will be tied. What is Ogbaragada? Ogbaragada commonly means the spread of outer fields or grounds of the earth, or what may be deemed to be Gbangba, that is, open space on the outside. Gbangba. In respect of the current analysis, Ogbaragada may best be referred to as a primordial open space, for it was in existence before the formation of the earth. It's in the present case, the primordial open space is a diviner who cast Ifa for Odu. This blank space may be conceptually likened to John Locke's tabula rasa, wherein the said space symbolizes a course of action or motion, just as the Lockean tabula rasa is, by nature, a condition or indicative template for receptiveness of perception, experience, and interpretative expressions of both perception and experience. In this perspective of immense scientific relevance, Ogbaragada represents the idea of fields in physics, and also the template of expression and interpretation of natural phenomena at both the molecular and atomic levels. Hence, from interpretation of indigenous Yoruba worldview in the Odu Ifa corpus, we find great prospects of contributing to knowledge in quantum theory of physics. It is imperative to note that Odu Ifa legends of creation are useful data for exploration of ideas in cosmological science. In the course of this engagement, the cosmological essence, along with issues in quantum theory, aforestated, will be discussed. For now, let us examine the sacrificial objects of scientific relevance, which are specifically listed in the corpus details of Ofumeji, presently under examination. We proceed with Igba Demu, the calabash of two perfectly equal halves, which grip perfectly at covering. Igba, yes, àwọn igba tó fi ń mẹ́mu. Igba àwọn ọmọ yẹn, èyí tó jẹ́ méjì tó jẹ́ pé tó bára mu rẹ́gí tá a bá dé tó mú, tó adé látòkè ó mú, adé láti ìsàlẹ̀ ó mú gẹ́rẹ́gẹ́. Igba Demu. In modern science, we are told that the earth is spherical in shape. Igba, the local calabash, is made from a spherical shaped fruit, which is scientifically called Laganeria ciceraria. In the story of creation captioned Oduduwa as the day when Odu created all beings on earth, the image of the earth is presented as Igba, which is naturally spherical in shape. The Igba in legend, which has a cover, presupposes a cutting up of the Igba fruit into two halves to make a complete calabash with cover. The statement that we, humans, and other beings reside in the calabash indicates a necessary opening up of the calabash to perceive the existential condition of the interior. Hence, there is a presentation of the earth forms in possible dual states, wherein the closed Igba indicates the spherical earth image from an outside or exterior view in modern science. The Igba cut into two parts and having the tips of the head and base turned southward of the hemisphere presents imageries of the interior in the position of central flatness that is at linear hemispheric equivalence from the western and eastern points. Hence, even though we are informed by modern science that we live on a spherical shaped entity of covered Igba, by vertical and horizontal experience of human existence, we all live on the flat surface of the earth. The southward alignment formation of the head and base points of the calabash presuppose a motion of symmetric commencement from the northern point of a vertical hemisphere to the anchor point base in the south. By visualization, this motion may occur in clockwise and anti-clockwise directions. This presumption of descent in dual pathways of force may thus be represented by a straight line from the north down to the south, from the midpoints, the tips of the It is imperative to further note that there is an exertion of force of descent which emerges from indicated dual variables and probable pathways of gravitational force. In a spread of the two halves of Igba the Calabash into the western and eastern hemispheres of space, there are two significant forms of geographic interest. By the descent induced by simultaneous motions of the Calabash at opening to the right and to the left sides, to connect the vertex head of the Calabash, which represents the northern hemisphere, to the base, which represents the southern hemisphere, there is a presentation of a vertical line when both halves are unified. This vertical line corresponds to the line that divides the eastern hemisphere from the western hemisphere. In geographical science, this is called the prime meridian. In a second significant form of geographical science interest, at the opening of the Calabash into two equal and corresponding halves, there is a presentation of horizontal stretch of linear form that corresponds to and intersects with the imaginary vertical meridian line. This horizontal linear imagery corresponds to the imagery line. This horizontal linear imagery corresponds to the imaginary line that divides the Earth into northern and southern hemispheres. In geographical science, this is called the equator. Drawing imageries from the Igba, it is arrived at by the current speaker that prior to a unification of the two Calabash halves, there are indications of two extreme corresponding points A and B at the eastern and western hemispheres, where the Calabash halves initially rest at the completion of clockwise and anti-clockwise motion at opening. These 2 points, A and B, are defined by imaginary lines. They are primarily independent and characteristically bypass the southern center base point of the Calabash. Evolutionarily, the prime meridian's root point intersects corresponding points A and B at the baseline midpoint, thus creating a third point of correspondence, point C. At unification, there is a single form at the southern base and hemisphere which absorbs 2 possible dimensions of the Calabash in clockwise and anti-clockwise motion, determined states. Hence, we have here presented 3 Calabash halves of prospective constant unidimensional base and evolving 2-dimensional interactive forces of gravity and alignment. By recourse to the Earth's act of rotation, it is presumed that these 3 physical connecting Calabash halves spin concurrently, either in unified or alternative directions, thus indicating a positional shift in the 3 imaginary lines of corresponding points A, B, and C. The shift further indicates a formation of a multi-positional and triangular force that is akin to a perpetually rotating pyramid where a new point, D, which is at the primary southern vertex of points A, B, and C, is deemed to be perpetually constant. The crux of this position is a suggestion of this model for expert examination of the Earth form in its perspective of a potential 3-dimensionality. Furthermore, the Igba, the prescribed sacrificial object the prescribed sacrificial object specificity in respect of the quality of perfectly matching halves of the Calabash in Ademu, that is the perfectly fitting cover, indicates that at the level of a spherical presentation of the Earth form, the template is preset for recourse to the central point of force impact as a result of clockwise and anti-clockwise gravitational pull from the northbound point of the Calabash at the vertex head to the southernbound point of the Calabash at the base. This gravitational pull is represented by a line which may also be deemed to be a central Earth pull. This primary central pull, perhaps in scientific visualization, may be deemed to quadruplicate into 4 poles of cardinal hemispheric correspondence. And so we may ask, in pursuit of scientific interest, is the Earth constituted of 4 poles? Modern science answers in the affirmative. However, this position of modern science may be insufficient in an exclusion of the primary central pole, thus warranting the necessary and complementary recourse to Oduduwa symbolisms and divinatica for exploratory research and for the improvement of knowledge. The primary central pole indicates a high probability of the Earth's operative 5th dimension that acts as a center of equilibrium and the causal base of binary evolution and multiplication. This central pole in Oduduwa divinatica is the final and 5th cosmic connecting point at divination called Herein. Okmo Ifa is a representation of the Earth form. Yeah. After the 4 dimensions are aligned to the Ifa casting, that are aligned, not just to Ifa casting change, but of course symbolically, it's also a representation on the mat when the priests the 4th dimension, after the 4 dimensions are aligned to Ifa casting chain by Babalawo's act of connecting to the earth by touching the floor with it during invocation. The 5th dimension is also aligned with by touching the ground with the Okpele Ifa casting chain at the center of the 4 contacted points. It is in the space of Herein, which is down, that the casting chain is felled repeatedly to present Odu indicators of probabilities in pursuit of truths from Ifa cosmological and constellation patterns that are drawn from 4 dimensions for interpretation on the template of a 5th dimension through Odu, the signpost of the computation matrix of nature in steady state binary modes and legends that are intrinsically characterized by changing paradigms. The primary central pole, as Herein, which is Itaonu, that is the outer field of the infinite heavens or space, indicates a connection to the open primordial space, Ogbaragada. This connection is represented by 4-dimensional exteriors, or polar quadrants. Lastly, but not the least, on the calabash. By opening up the calabash and establishing a stretch for flatness of the Earth's surface, while the Earth's spherical image in the form of the calabash is still intact at the aesthetic model base, some sort of elasticity is presumed to be in place to keep the flatness in a state of perpetuity. This elasticity indicates linear tensions at the impact point of extension. In the course of time, from the primordial stretch, the impact or reaction is expected to generate heat. Could this phenomenon be an indicator that may contribute to explanation about the heat which is generated at the equator axis? At this juncture, let us pause and proceed with the next sacrificial item for analysis, which is Okumeri, 4 poles. Geographic north and south. Yes, the 4 poles. In physical sciences, to be precise, under the topic magnetic field, it is thought that there are 4 magnetic poles of the Earth. These are the magnetic north and south, and the geographic north and south. What we can fathom from this is the similitude of 2 variants, the north and south, in geographic and magnetic distinctions. We can, by a system of symbolic reductionism, wherein ideas derived from metaforms of Ifa corpus data are presented in scientific and mathematical language, arrive at a preliminary symbolic definition of a unity of the stated similitude and distinction as N2/S2 primarily, as N raised to power 2/S raised to power 2 primarily, and secondarily as N, open bracket, the plus sign, close bracket, open bracket, the minus sign, close bracket, slash S, open bracket, plus sign, close bracket, S, open bracket, minus sign, negative minus sign, close bracket. Hence, in probing the probable interaction of the Earth's force field, closely looking into where common denominators of distinct qualities enjoin opposing poles to create variations may be useful to scientists in future expert studies. In a further visualized analysis of Okomeni for poles in the far corpus details of Ofumeji, the current speaker will quote briefly from a body of his yet-to-be published work entitled The Waterside Dialogues. Concerning the poles, I quote, "The poles, affixed to a metaphorical ground of space, suggests an infinite multipolar, or precisely a polar quadrant base of planet Earth, with extensions into the infinite space of a potentially calculable universe, wherein it is presumed that the effect of these poles extend throughout the entire universe through the nature agency of emimi, that is, vibrations. As a matter of off the quotes now, we continue with the discussion. As a matter of certitude, there are many issues arising from the scientific interpretations of Oduduwa legend of creation in Ofumeji, which are of relevance to global discourse in science, and which actually complement the achievements of the West in science. Let us take, for instance, Albert Einstein in his formal development of the theory of relativity. In the course of expounding this theory, he found a conceptual position by another European scientist called Minkowski to be very important. This position is that the world and space is four-dimensional. In Einstein's reflections, the four-dimensional world bears a close similarity to the three-dimensional space of Euclidean analytical geometry. Firstly, we may ask ourselves, could the four-dimensionality of Okomeri in the essay Far From Oduduwa of Ofumeji correlate to the position of Minkowski? Do the four poles recommended to Oduduwa, being one of the key sacrificial offering materials for establishing a physical order of planet Earth, and others, indicate that the Earth world and space are four-dimensional? Secondly, is there a position in the Yoruba worldview which may correlate with Euclidean three-dimensionality? To both critical questions, I say yes, prospectively. The possibility is very high. Characteristically, Yoruba legends may appear contradictory, but they are intrinsically flexible. The flexibility indicates multiple variations of truth about the universe in mythic models. This level of understanding of the Orisha phenomena, of the Orisha phenomenon, is that which Professor Wale Soyinka, in his book titled 7 Signposts of Existence, noted to indicate an intuitive grasp of the complexity of the human mind and a true sense of the infinite potentials of the universe. Hence, in the infinitude of potentials, from the Orisha scientific perspective, claims to certitude in science, particularly in respect of the universe, must have unified doors of skepticism and undiscovered possibilities carved into them. This is the essence of +1 addition to 400 Irumales to make Okanreniwo Irumale 401. The +1 is the fifth dimension of the cosmos, which is potentially infinite. This concept correlates with the indications of Arani Okmoitaonu, which is the single one pole that is a representation of the manifested infinite universe and infinite possibilities. In this regard, from the Oduduwa worldview, it is arrived at that the world is five-dimensional. Perhaps this five-dimensionality is a conceptual template which may be very helpful for astrophysicists in the 21st century. Where dimensionality is limited to the Earth space exclusively, the four-dimensionality that is posited by Minkowski may find correlation in Yoruba metaphysical position that Igumeri Laye. This is a position which holds variations of interpretation for scientific, metaphysical, ethical, and psychological directions. Igumeri Laye concept is the destination of the fourth overture of the Awu, overtures to Imo, knowledge of multidimensional consciousness and the harmony of these dimensions for good human living on Earth. Its corresponding concept can be found in the idea of four worlds of consciousness in Jewish Kabbalah. In this fourth overture of the Awu, an absence of deep understanding tilts character towards misuse of wisdom in the application of wisdom. In this fourth overture of the Awu, the absence of a deep understanding tilts character towards misuse of wisdom in the application of knowledge. Yeah. Misuse of wisdom in the application of knowledge. It's in the application of knowledge. Yes. This becomes a sort of abuse and degenerative witchcraft which impacts society negatively. Where wisdom merges with understanding in the fourth overture, the result is a positive opposite. In respect of the latter position on three-dimensionality, the basis for affirmation may not be directly derivable from the raw and crude state of Oduduwa corpus. However, in the course of over 20 years of exploring symbolisms, 20 years? No. No. In the course of over 2 decades of exploring symbolism in Oduduwa worldview for philosophic and scientific derivations and utility, a potential nursery of scientific possibilities was found to be possible in the course of interpreting an uncommon myth of creation where it was Orunmila and not Oduduwa who came to Earth with the primeval snail shell to create the Earth complex. Elemental analysis was employed in interpreting this myth, from which an order of numbers and a template of potential universal connectivity of matter and non-matter was derived. Established in this course was a proof of chance-determined correlation between causal abstract time and physical matter using the game of soccer as case study. In the numerological configuration of basic and definitive forms, a potential three-dimensional base of universal vibration was coined in the term that the current speaker christened the tricone. This term derives from the triangular cone that meets with the surface of the earth and sees from a potential base root of gravity. Elemental manifestation of this is in vibration that travels into the infinitum of space through rising and expanding effluxes from potential waves and water surface ripples on one part, and an undetermined measure from the static and rotating earth on the other part. This triangular cone is deemed to be a force with suction capacity at the base that represents a point of the most concentrated and intense exertion of binding force of matter on earth in one part and gravity on another. This dimension may be useful in discourse on the Bermuda Triangle, if such really exists, for interested researchers. It is also bright in prospects of exploring interpretations of the universe by possible conceptual correlations with volume integrals in mathematics and physics. So far, further development of the tricone is made under the heading prime spider icon upon the tricone, herein referred to as PUTT in relation to the study of soccer, where the 11 players at 2 levels of teams on the field represent the base 11 static impressions of the PUTT and its primary efflux form to form a first set of unified efflux base that is numerically characterized by figure 22. In this study, the chance potential correlation of matter and time is provable. Although this is not a subject for discussion at this time, it is an add-on. Yes, it's an add-on to demonstrate that what may ordinarily be deemed impossible derivations from Oduduwa corpus and legends are possible from advanced specialized interpretation through principles and interpretative processes of natural metaphorical history or the metaphorical history of nature in cultural and religious myths. At this juncture, let us proceed further to examine Enwon, the chain. Enwon, the chain. What? Enwon, the chain. What brings this into reckoning is a coordinate relation with Odu's hands, which are expected to operate without any hindrance according to corpus details. This operation indicates secured and constant motion. Odu was instructed to install the poles into a symbolic ground of space and place the calabash on it. Further indicated here is a hold onto the poles to which the hands and chain are fastened together in two possible variations: a vertical position on one side and in a horizontal position on another. These two possible variations of grip holds on the poles indicate a potential shift in the magnetic component paradigm of the Earth's core. They also stand to be further investigated in prospect of probable correspondence with the occurrence of eclipses at the juncture of possible grip holds positional interchange. In visualization, Odu's grip hold on the Ewo, chain fastened poles. In visualization, Odu's grip hold on the Ewo, chain fastened poles also indicate a constant magnetically induced motion and rotation of the calabash, wherein the hands, as a probable causal factor, spin the poles. This correlates with the concept of rotation of the earth in physical science. The Ewo, chain connecting both hands, is also deemed to connect to the poles by some sort of energy conduction. In the connection of Opo and Ewo, that is poles and chains, there is a possible enlivening of a potential electromagnetic induction within physical existence that paves way for natural conduction processes in the Earth's magnetic field. In the motion and magnetic concepts, we may also think mechanics. In historical presentations of physical science, it is on record under the topic electromagnetic induction that in the year 1600, after an experiment with materials that have magnetic properties, an English doctor named William Gilbert, in studying the motion of the Earth, arrived at the position that the Earth behaved like a giant magnet. His conclusion was that the Earth's central core is made up of permanently magnetic material. To buttress this stated scientific opinion, it is stated, it is a matter of fact that there are deposits of iron ore in the Earth's crust. Hence, in further interpretation of Oduduwa, according to the Oduduwa of Fumeji, it is assumed that the constant motion of the four pillars and fastened chain generate effect, which will be defined to be emimi, vibrations, through waves that affect the iron ore substance of the Earth crust in a manner that most probably activates a potential magnetic force field. Certainly, the course of interpreting Oduduwa scientifically may guide scientists on the role of the Earth in the galactic equilibrium or universal equilibrium. Perhaps our Earth is the anchor of the material universe, the fifth dimensionality of the world, and probably space, which is suggested by Irene Okmoitaonu, may be very essential in exploring the presumption of the Earth being an anchor of the material universe. A step in the right direction for any willing institution or conglomeration of interested institutions is to move to acquire and document all Yoruba legends of creation across Yoruba land and the diaspora. This should not exclude creation legends of Benin Kingdom. At this juncture, we must necessarily, we'll take a pause, take a break, and we'll proceed in another session. And this time we shall be considering the further consolidation of the scientific essence of Oduduwa based on selected details of Ese Ifa, Ese Oduifa, or Saogunda,